Jake Carter's stomach growled as he pressed himself against the cold metal wall of Zephyros Station's market district. 3 days without food did things to a man's judgment. The vendor's back was turned for just a second, and Jake's hand shot out, grabbing 2 protein packs from the counter. He didn't even make it 5 steps before the alarm started screaming. "Stop! Thief!" Jake ran. His worn boots slapped against the metal grating as security drones buzzed to life behind him. Red lights flooded the corridor, and panicked aliens scattered out of his path. A 4-armed merchant shouted something in a language Jake didn't understand, but the tone was clear enough. He'd screwed up. Again. The drones were faster than him. They always were. Jake ducked through a maintenance passage, his shoulder slamming into the doorframe. Pain shot down his arm, but he kept moving. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for his frame, designed for the station's smaller maintenance workers. Behind him, the drones recalibrated, their sensors pinging off the walls. He burst through another door and immediately knew he'd made a mistake. The corridor ahead was different from the rest of the station. Cleaner. Older. Emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie blue glow, and holographic warning signs floated in the air, written in scripts Jake had never seen before. Some kind of restricted area. Perfect. The drones were seconds behind him. Jake sprinted forward, his lungs burning, and crashed through a final doorway that shouldn't have been unlocked. The room beyond made him stop dead in his tracks. It was massive, easily 100 feet across, with a domed ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. And at the center, floating 3 feet off the ground, was a crystal the size of a cargo container. It glowed with a soft amber light, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. The air around it shimmered with some kind of energy field, and more of those alien warning signs floated in a protective circle. Jake's hand throbbed. During the chase, he'd scraped it raw against a jagged wall edge. Blood dripped steadily from his palm onto the pristine floor. The drone's whining grew louder behind him. No other exits. He was trapped. Without thinking, Jake stumbled forward, pressing himself against the energy barrier surrounding the crystal. Maybe he could hide behind it. Maybe the drones wouldn't fire near something this obviously important. His bleeding hand touched the barrier's surface. Everything changed. The crystal erupted with light so bright Jake had to shield his eyes. Golden fire poured from its surface, filling the entire chamber with blinding radiance. The energy barrier vanished, and Jake fell forward, his hand slapping directly against the crystal's warm surface. The moment his blood touched it, something ancient and vast crashed into his mind. It wasn't words exactly. More like pure meaning being downloaded directly into his brain. Images flashed faster than thought, cities that stretched across entire planets, ships that could crack worlds in half, beings of 1,000 different species working together under golden banners. And a voice, speaking in a language that shouldn't exist anymore, but somehow Jake understood every syllable. The Lost King returns. The heir of the sovereign line stands before us. The blood seal is broken. Jake tried to pull his hand away, but his muscles wouldn't respond. More images flooded in, a war across galaxies, darkness consuming stars, a desperate final stand, and then nothing. Silence. Extinction. The crystal showed him the end of a civilization so advanced they'd ruled the galaxy for millions of years before his ancestors even learned to use fire. And then it showed him something worse. A darkness beyond the edge of known space, patient and hungry, waiting to return. The thing that had destroyed the crystal's creators. The unmaking, they'd called it. And it was coming back. The light faded. Jake collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. His hand was still pressed against the crystal, which now blazed like a miniature sun. Every alarm in the sector started screaming at once. Through the chamber's windows, he saw security ships changing course, converging on his location like sharks smelling blood. The doors exploded inward. Not the maintenance drones this time, but actual soldiers in combat armor, weapons raised. Behind them came aliens in elaborate robes, their expressions shifting from anger to shock to something that looked like terror as they saw Jake kneeling before the active crystal. A massive reptilian creature pushed through the crowd. It had to be 8 feet tall, covered in emerald scales, with eyes that reflected the crystal's light like mirrors. It wore robes marked with symbols Jake somehow recognized now as signs of high authority in the Galactic Council. Impossible, the creature hissed, its voice translator making the words sound hollow and artificial. The sovereign shard has been dormant for 10,000 cycles. No species has activated it. Not the hierarchs. Not the seekers. Not even the voidborn in their arrogance. Jake tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't support him. I didn't mean to, I was just running from. Silence. Another alien stepped forward, this one vaguely insectoid with compound eyes that reflected Jake 100 times over. This human has violated the most sacred relic in known space. Execute him immediately before he damages it further. You cannot execute him, the reptilian said slowly, staring at the blazing crystal. The shard has accepted him. It has named him heir to the predecessor empire. Whether we like it or not, this changes everything. A human? The insectoid's translator spat the word like a curse. A species barely capable of interstellar travel? Impossible. But the crystal pulsed again, and everyone in the room felt it, a wave of ancient power recognizing Jake as something he definitely wasn't. Whatever he'd accidentally activated, it thought he was royalty. The lost king of an empire that died before humanity even existed. Jake looked down at his bleeding hand, still pressed against the crystal's surface. The stolen protein packs had fallen from his pocket, lying forgotten on the floor. He'd been stealing food to survive, and now these aliens were calling him a king. What happens now? Jake asked quietly. The reptilian's eyes narrowed. Now, human, you become the most important and most dangerous being in the galaxy. The predecessors left behind vaults full of technology that could reshape civilization. The sovereign shard is the key to opening them. It paused. And you are the key to the shard. Every species, every faction, every power in known space will want to control you or kill you. Your life as a nobody is over. Jake tried to pull his hand away from the crystal again. This time it let him go, but the golden light didn't fade. It followed him, wrapping around his wrist like a glowing bracelet, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. Branded. Marked. Claimed by something he didn't understand. Guards surrounded him, not roughly but with an almost religious reverence that was somehow worse than hostility. Through the crowd of aliens, Jake caught glimpses of news drones hovering outside the windows, broadcasting everything. His face. The crystal. The moment a human beggar accidentally claimed the throne of a dead empire. He was still hungry. His hands still hurt. But none of that mattered anymore. The crystal had chosen him, and whether he wanted it or not, Jake Carter was about to change the fate of the galaxy. Jake sat on what the aliens called a detention bed but felt more like a luxury hotel mattress. The room had transparent walls on one side, giving him a perfect view of the Galactic Council chamber below. Hundreds of alien delegates filled the circular arena, and from what Jake could tell, they were all screaming at each other about him. A four-armed delegate threw something at a floating jellyfish creature. Security drones swarmed between two groups that looked ready to start an actual fight. Through the transparent floor, Jake could see the sovereign shard in a secured vault 3 levels down, still glowing that same golden color, still pulsing like it was calling to him. Quite a mess you've made. Jake turned to see a human woman entering through the security door. She was maybe 40, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and tired eyes that suggested she hadn't slept in days. She wore a jacket covered in academic patches and carried a data tablet that projected holographic images into the air. Dr. Rachel Stone, she said, not offering a handshake. Xenoarchaeology specialist. I've spent 20 years studying the predecessors, and you just accomplished in 5 seconds what entire civilizations couldn't do in 10,000 years. I didn't mean to touch anything, Jake said. I was just trying to hide. Rachel laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Well, you picked the worst hiding spot in galactic history. She activated her tablet, and a 3-dimensional model of the sovereign shard appeared between them. This thing was built by the predecessor empire. They ruled the galaxy millions of years before humans even existed. Technology so advanced it makes our best stuff look like stone tools. They built vaults across known space, filled with weapons, power sources, medical tech, things we don't even have words for yet. Jake watched the hologram rotate. Up close, he could see patterns in the crystal structure that reminded him of circuit boards, except organic somehow, like they'd grown instead of being built. So what happened to them? That's the mystery. Rachel pulled up star charts showing vast empty regions of space. About 10,000 years ago, the predecessors just vanished. Every single one of them, across millions of worlds. They left behind their cities, their technology, everything except themselves. The sovereign shard was supposed to be their method of choosing leaders. It would scan someone's genetic code and verify they were legitimate heirs to the empire. But I'm not. Obviously not, Rachel interrupted. You're human. We didn't even exist when they disappeared. But somehow, your DNA triggered something in that crystal's programming. It recognized you as compatible. She pulled up a genetic comparison that Jake barely understood. Two strands of DNA appeared side by side, one labeled human and one labeled predecessor genetic key. They looked completely different, except for small sections that Rachel highlighted in green. Humans are genetic pack rats, Rachel explained. Our evolutionary history is messy. We absorbed genes from other human species that went extinct. We adapted to every environment on Earth. We're basically designed to be flexible and compatible with almost anything. Somehow, that messy adaptation accidentally recreated certain genetic markers the predecessors were looking for. So the crystal thinks I'm their king because of random evolution? Basically yes. Rachel closed the hologram. Which brings us to our current problem. 3 major factions have formed in the last 6 hours, and they're all ready to go to war over you. She pulled up profiles of various alien delegates. The first group showed stern-looking beings in military uniforms. The hierarchs. They've run the Galactic Council for 3,000 years. They think you're either a human trick or a glitch in the crystal's programming. Either way, they want you dead before you can destabilize their power structure. The second group looked more diverse, wearing robes covered in strange symbols. The Seekers. They're a religious movement that's been waiting for the prophesied return of the predecessor heir. They think you're literally their savior and want to worship you. Some of them are already building temples with your face on them. Jake felt sick. That's insane. It gets worse. Rachel showed him the third group, a mix of species wearing mismatched armor and carrying improvised weapons. The Voidborn. Separatist factions who've wanted to overthrow the council for centuries. They see you as their ticket to power. If they can control you, they can access predecessor technology and start a revolution. Through the window, Jake watched 2 delegates actually start fighting. Security had to pull them apart. What do they want from me? Access. Rachel's expression darkened. The Sovereign Shard is just the key. The real prize is the vaults. There are at least 40 known predecessor vault sites scattered across the galaxy. Each one is sealed with technology we can't break. Governments have spent billions trying to get inside them. The Council even tried using antimatter charges on one vault. Didn't even scratch the door. She pulled up images of massive metallic structures on various planets. Some were buried underground. Others floated in space like ancient fortresses. All of them covered in the same strange symbols Jake had seen in the crystal chamber. But you can open them, Rachel continued. The shard recognized you, which means it gave you access codes written into your genetics now. You're the only being in the galaxy who can unlock predecessor technology. Jake looked at his hand, where the golden light still wrapped around his wrist like a living tattoo. It pulsed gently, warm against his skin. What if I just refuse? What if I don't open any vaults? Then they'll dissect you to figure out how the crystal chose you. Or they'll force you. Or they'll kill you and hope the shard picks someone else. Rachel sat down beside him. Jake, I need you to understand something. The technology in those vaults could cure diseases that kill billions. It could provide unlimited clean energy. It could also build weapons that make our current wars look like playground fights. Every major power in the galaxy wants that technology, and you're the only one who can give it to them. So I'm trapped. Completely. Rachel pulled up one more image. A planet called Kronheim, brown and unremarkable except for a massive structure on its surface. The Council is taking you there tomorrow. There's a predecessor vault that's been studied for centuries. They want to test if you can actually open it. If you succeed, you prove you're legitimate. If you fail, they kill me as a fraud. Probably. Rachel stood up. I'm coming with you. I've spent my whole life studying the predecessors, and I'm not missing this. But Jake, you need to be ready. Whatever's in that vault, it's going to change everything. The predecessors didn't just disappear for no reason. They left those vaults sealed for 10,000 years. There has to be a reason why. She turned to leave, then stopped at the door. One more thing. The crystal's been broadcasting your genetic signature across subspace since it activated. Every species with faster-than-light sensors has picked it up. By now, everyone knows a human triggered the Sovereign Shard. There are already riots on some worlds. 3 governments have collapsed. And somewhere out there, people are planning to kill you. After she left, Jake stood at the window watching the council chamber descend further into chaos. A new fight had broken out between the insectoid delegates and a group of crystalline beings. Emergency crews were setting up barriers. Jake had been invisible his whole life. A nobody. A beggar stealing food just to survive another day. Now the entire galaxy knew his name, and half of them wanted him dead while the other half wanted to worship him. The sovereign shard pulsed 3 levels below, still calling him king. Jake pressed his forehead against the cool window and closed his eyes. Tomorrow he'd go to Kronheim. Tomorrow he'd try to open a vault that had been sealed since before humanity learned to make fire. Tomorrow everything would change. But tonight, he was still just a scared guy who'd made the worst mistake of his life by touching something he shouldn't have. The crystal might think he was special, but Jake knew the truth. He was just a beggar who'd gotten incredibly, dangerously lucky. And that luck was about to run out. SF. The transport ship dropped out of hyperspace above Kronheim, and Jake got his first look at the vault that would decide whether he lived or died. Through the viewport, the planet looked like a dusty brown marble, unremarkable except for the massive metallic structure jutting from its northern continent like a broken tooth. "That's bigger than I expected," Jake muttered. Rachel stood beside him, her face pressed against the glass. "The scans say it goes down at least 3 miles underground. We've only ever seen the entrance. No one knows how large it actually is inside." The vault looked like someone had carved a mountain from solid metal and covered it in circuits. Even from orbit, Jake could see the symbols etched across its surface, the same strange writing he'd seen in the crystal chamber. They seemed to shift and move when he looked at them too long, making his eyes hurt. The landing was tense. Jake counted at least 50 ships in orbit around Kronheim, representing every major species in the Council. Warships, research vessels, news drones broadcasting to billions of viewers across the galaxy. Everyone wanted to see if the human beggar could actually open a predecessor vault. When Jake stepped off the transport, the heat hit him like a physical wall. Kronheim's twin suns blazed overhead, turning the rocky ground into a furnace. A delegation of aliens waited at the landing pad, along with what looked like an entire military battalion and enough cameras to film a dozen movies. The reptilian counselor from the crystal chamber stepped forward. Jake had learned his name was Counselor Vex, and he spoke for the hierarchs. "Human. You will approach the vault under armed escort. You will attempt to open it. If you succeed, the contents will be catalogued and secured by Council authority. If you fail, you will be detained for further investigation." "Investigation means execution," Rachel whispered. "They've already decided you're dangerous." Jake wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at him to get back on the ship and disappear into deep space. But the golden light around his wrist pulsed warmly, and suddenly he felt calm. Not his emotion, he realized. The sovereign shard was doing something to him, feeding him confidence that wasn't his own. The walk to the vault took 20 minutes across scorching desert. Jake's shirt was soaked with sweat by the time they reached the entrance. Up close, the structure was even more impossible. The metal didn't reflect light properly, as if it existed slightly out of phase with normal reality. The symbols covering its surface glowed faintly, pulsing in patterns that reminded Jake of breathing. The entrance itself was a massive door, easily 200 feet tall and perfectly smooth except for the symbols. Centuries of research equipment surrounded it. Drilling rigs that had broken against the metal. Energy scanners that showed nothing. Even a crater where someone had apparently tried using a nuclear device, which had left 0 damage. "Thousands have tried," Vex said, his voice carrying a hint of satisfaction. "Every species. Every method. The vault remains sealed. If you truly carry the predecessor legacy, human, now is your moment to prove it." Jake approached the door slowly. His boots crunched on sand that had been fused into glass by weapons testing. Behind him, he heard the whir of cameras, the whisper of 100 different species watching his every move. Somewhere out there, billions more were watching on broadcasts. He reached out and touched the door. The symbols exploded with light. Jake gasped as information flooded into his brain. Not painful this time, but overwhelming. The door was showing him things, teaching him in seconds what would take years to learn normally. He understood suddenly that this wasn't just a door. It was a test, scanning his genetics, his neural patterns, comparing them against templates stored in its memory for 10,000 years. And it recognized him. The symbols rearranged themselves, flowing like liquid metal into new patterns. A handprint appeared on the door's surface, glowing the same golden color as the shard's light on Jake's wrist. Without thinking, Jake pressed his hand against it. The door opened. Not slowly or dramatically. 1 second it was solid metal, the next it simply wasn't there anymore, revealing a tunnel that stretched into darkness. I rushed out, ancient and stale, carrying the smell of ozone and something else Jake couldn't identify. Behind him, chaos erupted. Scientists rushed forward, scanners raised. Guards formed defensive positions. Counselor Vex was shouting orders that no one seemed to hear. Rachel grabbed Jake's arm, her eyes wide with excitement and terror. Jake, you actually did it. You opened a predecessor vault. They entered together, surrounded by armed guards and scientists practically vibrating with excitement. Emergency lights flickered on as they walked, responding to their presence. The tunnel was massive, wide enough to drive trucks through, with walls that seemed to be made of the same reality-bending metal as the exterior. After 5 minutes of walking, the tunnel opened into a chamber that made everyone stop dead. It was the size of a football stadium, filled with technology that hummed with quiet power despite sitting dormant for 10,000 years. Massive cylindrical structures reached from floor to ceiling, covered in the pulsing symbols. Platforms held devices Jake had no names for. And in the center, floating 3 feet off the ground, was a sphere of pure white light that hurt to look at directly. Power core, Rachel breathed, her scanner going crazy. It's still active. After 10,000 years, it's still generating energy. The readings I'm getting, this thing could power an entire planet indefinitely. A scientist rushed past them toward a wall covered in smaller devices. Medical equipment. These scanners are showing cellular manipulation at the atomic level. This technology could cure anything. Cancer, genetic disorders, aging itself. More discoveries came rapid fire. Weapons that fired coherent energy beams. Communication devices that worked instantly across galactic distances. Data storage containing more information than every computer in known space combined. And manufacturing systems that could apparently create anything from raw matter. This is impossible, Counselor Vex said, staring at a device his own scientists were examining. One vault contains more advanced technology than our entire civilization has developed in 3,000 years. Jake walked deeper into the chamber, drawn by instinct toward the floating sphere. As he approached, a console rose from the floor, covered in symbols that now made perfect sense to him. The Shard's knowledge was still flowing, teaching him to read predecessor script as easily as English. He touched the console, and a holographic display materialized. Star maps showing the locations of other vaults. Inventory lists of their contents. Security protocols. And something else that made Jake's blood run cold. Warning messages. Dozens of them, all saying the same thing in different ways. Rachel, Jake called out. You need to see this. She came over, squinting at the holographic text she couldn't read. What does it say? They are warnings. From the last predecessor king. Jake scrolled through the messages, his hands moving automatically across controls he'd never seen before. They didn't vanish. They were running. From something called the Unmaking. Some kind of threat from dark space that they couldn't stop. The hologram shifted, showing images that made Jake's stomach turn. Stars going dark. Planets torn apart. Fleets of ships that bent space in impossible ways, attacking predecessor stations. And creatures, if you could call them that, made of twisted geometry that hurt his eyes to look at. They fought for 1,000 years, Jake continued, reading the desperate messages. They threw everything at this enemy. But they kept losing. So their final king sealed the vaults, hoping someone would come after them who could use their weapons to finish the fight. After them? Rachel's face had gone pale. Jake, where did the Unmaking go? Jake found the final message. It was short, written by someone who knew they were recording the end of their civilization. It says the Unmaking went dormant after consuming the predecessor empire. But it's still out there, waiting in dark space. And it will wake up again when it senses new civilizations reaching advanced enough technology. A new alert appeared on the console, this one in bright red. Jake read it, then read it again, hoping he'd misunderstood. What? Rachel demanded. What does it say? It says recent faster-than-light signatures detected in Sector 7 match Unmaking patterns. Preliminary incursion detected 3 weeks ago. Jake looked at her, fear washing over him. Rachel, it's already here. The thing that killed the predecessors is back, and it's starting to wake up. Across the chamber, other scientists were celebrating their discoveries. Counselor Vex was already arguing with delegates about who would control the vault's contents. None of them understood yet. Jake had opened the vault expecting to find treasure. Instead, he'd found a warning. The predecessors hadn't left their technology as a gift. They'd left it as a last desperate hope that someone could use their weapons to fight an enemy they couldn't defeat. And judging by the readings on his console, that enemy had already started destroying ships on the galaxy's edge. The warnings the predecessors left had come 10,000 years too late. The Sovereign Shard pulsed on Jake's wrist, and he felt new knowledge downloading. Tactical systems. Weapon protocols. defense networks. The crystal wasn't just making him a king. It was trying to make him a general in a war that had already begun. "We need to leave," Jake said quietly. "Right now. We need to warn the council." But even as he said it, Jake knew the truth. They wouldn't believe him. They were too busy fighting each other over the vault's technology to see the real threat approaching from the darkness between stars. The beggar who'd touched a crystal was about to become a prophet of doom. And no one was going to listen until it was too late. Jake stood in the command center of a predecessor warship he'd somehow brought back to life, watching the galaxy tear itself apart on 100 different screens. Each display showed a different crisis. Protests on Earth. 3 colony worlds declaring independence from the Galactic Council. Ships firing on each other over disputed vault locations. And through it all, the sovereign shard pulsed on his wrist, feeding him information he never asked for. 2 weeks had passed since Kronheim. 2 weeks of chaos. "Another assassination attempt last night," Rachel said, entering with a data pad. Dark circles surrounded her eyes. She hadn't slept properly since they discovered the unmaking warnings. Void-born separatists tried to breach the ship's shields. Your predecessor defense systems vaporized them before they got within a mile. Jake didn't look away from the screens. "How many does that make?" 17 attempts in 14 days. Rachel pulled up security footage showing various groups trying to kill him. Poison. Bombs. Energy weapons. Biological agents. Even one attempt involving a teleporter that had somehow gotten past 3 security checkpoints. The hierarchs want you dead because you're destabilizing their power. The Seekers want you alive but controlled. And the Voidborn want to use you as their weapon against the Council. Everyone wants something. Jake finally turned to face her. Except no one wants to listen about the actual threat. He pulled up the reports they'd been tracking. Ships disappearing in the outer reach. Colonies going silent. Strange sensor readings that matched the unmaking patterns from the predecessor warnings. 11 incidents in 2 weeks, each one closer to populated space. "The Council says it's pirates," Rachel said bitterly. "Or equipment failures. Or natural phenomena. Anything except admitting there's something out there that could wipe us all out." Jake activated another display, showing the predecessor database he'd been studying. The warship's AI had been teaching him, downloading information directly into his brain while he slept. He now understood technology that shouldn't exist, spoke languages that had been dead for millennia, and had tactical knowledge from a civilization that had fought a 1,000-year war. "They left 43 vaults," Jake said, highlighting locations across the star map. "I've opened 6 so far. Each one has enough weapons and power cores to defend multiple systems. But the Council is too busy fighting over who controls them to actually use them." Rachel sat down heavily. "What about the human ambassador?" Michael Grant seemed sympathetic. "He's trying. But Earth's government is fractured. Half want to support me. The other half think I'm making everything up to seize power." Jake laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. 2 months ago I was stealing food to survive. Now half the galaxy thinks I'm trying to become a dictator. On one screen, footage played of riots outside the Council headquarters. Aliens of a dozen species waving banners, some supporting Jake, others demanding his execution. A news anchor was calling him the greatest threat to galactic stability in recorded history. "You could run," Rachel said quietly. "Take this ship. It's faster than anything the Council has. You could disappear into unknown space, take the shard with you. Let them figure out the unmaking on their own." Jake had thought about it. Every night when another assassination attempt failed. Every time he saw the galaxy spiraling toward civil war because of him. He could run. The predecessor ship had enough supplies to last years. He could find some empty planet and live out his life in peace. But then he closed his eyes and saw the memories the shard kept showing him. The last predecessor king, standing in a vault just like the ones Jake had opened, recording his final message. Tears streaming down a face that was alien but somehow heartbreakingly familiar. "I can't," Jake said. That last king, whoever he was, he sealed these vaults knowing his entire civilization was dying. He left everything behind hoping someone would come who could finish what they started. "How can I run from that?" "Because you're not him," Rachel said firmly. "You're human. You're 26 years old. You were homeless 3 months ago. The weight of the galaxy shouldn't be on your shoulders." "But it is." Jake touched the console, and new information appeared. Schematics for weapons the predecessors had built. Reality anchors that could force the unmaking ships into normal space. Dimensional shields. Gravity wells. All of it useless as long as the galaxy's civilizations kept fighting each other. An alert flashed across his screens. Incoming transmission, Council Priority Channel. Jake accepted it, and Michael Grant's face appeared. The human ambassador looked exhausted. Jake, the Council is calling a vote tomorrow. The hierarchs are pushing for a resolution to declare you an enemy of all species. If it passes, every government in the galaxy will be legally obligated to hunt you down. Let them try, Jake said. This ship has shields that laugh at their weapons. It's not about whether they can catch you. Michael leaned closer to the camera. If they declare you an enemy, it gives them legal justification to seize all predecessor technology by force. The vaults you've opened will become battlegrounds. Species will go to war over them. Everything you've tried to prevent will happen anyway. Jake felt the weight of it settle over him like a physical thing. No matter what he did, people died. If he opened the vaults, species fought over them. If he didn't, they'd have no defense against the unmaking. If he stayed and fought, he was a dictator. If he ran, he was a coward abandoning the galaxy. There's another option, Rachel said slowly. She'd been working on her datapad, and now she projected something into the air between them. What if you gave it away? All of it. Jake stared at the plan she'd created. What do you mean? Broadcast the vault locations. Every single one. Share the access codes, the technology, everything. Make it impossible for anyone to control it because everyone has access. Rachel's eyes were bright with desperate hope. The predecessors wanted someone to use their weapons. They never said it had to be one person. That's insane, Michael said from the screen. You'd be arming everyone. Including groups that would use predecessor weapons to start wars. They're already starting wars, Rachel shot back. At least this way, no single faction has an advantage. It forces them to either cooperate or destroy each other, and if they're destroying each other, the unmaking will wipe out what's left. Jake thought about it. The hierarchs would call him a fool. The Seekers would say he'd betrayed his destiny. The Voidborn would lose their chance at revolution. But maybe, just maybe, it would unite the galaxy through sheer necessity. The predecessors were advanced beyond anything we can imagine, Jake said slowly. But they still lost. They had better weapons, better shields, better everything, and the unmaking still killed them. You know why? Rachel shook her head. Because they fought alone. Each species trying to save themselves. By the time they finally united, it was too late. Jake pulled up the final battle reports from the predecessor database. Their last king wrote that their greatest failure wasn't technology. It was trust. They didn't trust each other enough to work together until their civilization was already dying. He made his decision. Set up a galaxy-wide broadcast. Every channel, every frequency. I'm going to make a speech. Michael's face went pale. Jake, if you do this, there's no going back. The Council will view it as an act of war. They already view me as a threat. At least this way, I'm a threat trying to save them. Jake stood up, straightening his jacket. The stolen clothes he'd been wearing when he touched the crystal had been replaced with something the ship's fabricators had made, but he still felt like a beggar playing dress-up. Rachel set up the broadcast equipment while Jake reviewed what he wanted to say. No script. No prepared remarks. Just truth, raw and unfiltered. The broadcast went live at midnight, station time. Every screen in the galaxy interrupted its programming to show Jake's face. My name is Jake Carter. 3 months ago, I was homeless, stealing food to survive on Zephyros Station. Then I bled on an ancient crystal, and it called me a king. I'm not a king. I'm not special. I'm just a guy who got unlucky enough to have the right genetics. He transmitted the vault coordinates as he spoke. All 43 locations, appearing on screens across the galaxy. The predecessors left these vaults for whoever came after them. I'm deciding that's all of us. Every species. Every government. Take what you need. Share what you learn. Build the weapons. Power your worlds. Cure your sick. But know this, we're not alone. The threat that destroyed the predecessors is coming back, and if we don't stand together, we'll all die separately. Jake ended the broadcast and sat down, suddenly exhausted. Within seconds, his console lit up with responses. Thousands of messages. Some calling him a hero. Others calling him a traitor. Most just confused. Rachel put a hand on his shoulder. You just gave away the most valuable secret in galactic history. I know. They're going to come for you anyway. Some to thank you. Most to kill you for taking away their advantage. I know that too. On the screens, Jake watched as ships began moving toward the vault locations. Racing each other. Some cooperating. Others preparing to fight. The galaxy's future balanced on a knife's edge, and he just pushed it over. The sovereign shard pulsed one final time, then went dark. Its light faded from Jake's wrist, leaving just a faint scar. The crystal had served its purpose. It hadn't needed a king. It had needed a catalyst. Someone willing to unite the galaxy even if it meant giving up ultimate power. Jake was just a beggar again. But this time, he'd chosen to give away a kingdom instead of stealing bread. Now he just had to hope the galaxy would survive his choice. The response to Jake's broadcast was immediate and chaotic. Within hours, ships from every major civilization converged on the vault locations. Some arrived ready to cooperate. Others came armed for war. But something unexpected happened on the mining colony of Terra Nova when human and alien scientists started working together to extract a power core from one of the vaults. They succeeded in 3 days, when previous attempts had taken months. Word spread. On the industrial world of Forge Prime, 6 different species collaborated to unlock medical technology that cured a plague that had been killing thousands. A Hierarch's military commander and a Void-born rebel leader worked side by side to activate defensive shields on a border colony, setting aside decades of hatred because the alternative was watching civilians die. It wasn't perfect. Fights still broke out. 2 species went to war over a disputed vault on a border world. But slowly, grudgingly, cooperation became more common than conflict. The shared threat Jake had warned about made old enemies into uncomfortable allies. Rachel burst into Jake's quarters 3 weeks after the broadcast, her face flushed with excitement. We've got confirmation. The research teams are sharing data across species lines. The Seekers provided ancient texts that helped decode vault security systems. The Hierarchs contributed their best engineers. Even the Voidborn are sending their tactical specialists. Jake looked up from the predecessor database he'd been studying. Despite the shard going dark, he still retained the knowledge it had downloaded. How many vaults have been opened? 27 so far. And Jake, the technology they are finding, it's changing everything. A colony that was running out of breathable air now has atmospheric processes that'll last 1,000 years. A hospital on the edge of Council space just cured a genetic disease that's been killing children for generations. And the weapons? Rachel's smile faded. Those too. Enough firepower to defend multiple systems. Which is good, because we're going to need it. She pulled up sensor data that made Jake's stomach clench. The disappearances on the galaxy's edge had stopped being mysterious. Ships were reporting actual contact now. Vessels that phased in and out of normal space. Energy weapons that unraveled matter at the molecular level. And worst of all, confirmed sightings of the entities the predecessors had called the Unmaking. They're testing our defenses, Jake said, reading the tactical reports. Just like they did with the predecessors. Small probes, seeing how we respond, learning our weaknesses. The Council finally believes you. They've recalled all military forces to defensive positions. But Jake, we're not ready. Even with predecessor technology, we need more time. We're not going to get it. Jake highlighted a pattern in the attacks. Look at the intervals. They're getting shorter. 3 weeks between the first and second attack. 2 weeks until the third. 1 week until the fourth. They're accelerating. Michael Grant's face appeared on the communication screen. The human ambassador looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past month. Jake, emergency council session in 1 hour. They're requesting your presence. Requesting or demanding? Does it matter? The Unmaking just destroyed an entire mining outpost in the Chronos system. 4,000 people gone in seconds. The galaxy needs leadership, and whether you like it or not, you're the closest thing we have to someone who understands what we're facing. The council chamber was packed when Jake arrived. Every species had sent representatives. The arguments that had filled this room for weeks had been replaced by grim silence. On the central display, footage played of the destroyed outpost. One moment it was there, lights and life and people. The next, nothing but debris floating in space. Councillor Vex stood to speak. The reptilian had opposed Jake from the beginning, but now his voice carried no hostility, only exhaustion. Human. You warned us. We did not listen. 4,000 souls paid the price for our arrogance. He paused. The council recognizes that you possess knowledge of the enemy we face. We formally request your strategic assistance. Jake walked to the center of the chamber, aware of thousands of eyes on him. I'm not a military commander. Everything I know came from a crystal that's now dead. But I'll tell you what the predecessors learned after fighting the Unmaking for 1,000 years. He activated displays showing the predecessor battle strategies. They're not ships in the traditional sense. They exist partially outside our dimension, which is why conventional weapons barely touch them. But predecessor technology includes dimensional anchors, devices that force them into normal space where we can hurt them. A crystalline delegate spoke up. We've retrieved such devices from 3 vaults. But we have no experience deploying them in combat. Then we learn fast. Jake pulled up schematics. The predecessors also developed coordinated defense networks. Ships from multiple species working together, sharing targeting data in real time. No single fleet can stop them. But a unified force might stand a chance. Unified under whose command? Asked an insectoid admiral. The Council has never fought as one military force. Then it's time to start. Jake looked around the chamber. The predecessors failed because they couldn't trust each other until it was too late. We have one advantage they didn't. We know what's coming. We've seen what happened to them. We can choose to do better. The debate lasted hours. Species that had been enemies for centuries had to agree on command structures, resource sharing, tactical coordination. But slowly, impossibly, a plan emerged. A joint defense force drawing ships from every major civilization. Predecessor weapons distributed based on strategic need rather than political power. And at the center, coordinating it all, Jake Carter, the human who'd touched a crystal. I don't want this, Jake told Rachel later in the command center of his predecessor ship, which had been renamed the Second Chance. I never wanted any of this. I know. Rachel was helping set up the communication networks that would link the Allied fleets. But here we are. The Unmaking's main force arrived 3 days later. The sensor readings came in waves, each one worse than the last. Not dozens of ships. Hundreds. Maybe thousands. They emerged from dark space at the edge of the Sirius sector, reality bending around them like heat shimmer. Normal space seemed to crack in their presence. Jake stood in the Second Chance's command center, surrounded by holographic displays showing the Allied fleet. Human destroyers flying alongside Hierarch's cruisers. Voidborn fighters coordinating with Seeker support ships. Species that had been fighting each other weeks ago now depended on each other for survival. All ships, this is Carter. Jake's voice carried across the fleet's communication network. Deploy dimensional anchors on my mark. Remember your training. Force them into normal space, then hit them with everything you've got. The Unmaking fleet didn't slow down. They came in like a wave of twisted geometry, their ships phasing through conventional shields as if they didn't exist. The first volleys of normal weapons passed right through them, doing nothing. Now, Jake commanded. Across the Allied fleet, predecessor dimensional anchors activated. Space itself seemed to solidify around the Unmaking ships, forcing them into the same reality as their targets. Suddenly, weapons designed for this universe could touch them. The battle was brutal. The Unmaking's vessels fired weapons that unraveled ships at the molecular level. But predecessor shields held where normal ones failed. And when the Allied fleet returned fire with ancient weapons, the enemy ships actually took damage. Jake's hands moved across controls he'd learned from the crystal's downloads, coordinating attacks across hundreds of ships. His tactical display showed friendly casualties mounting, but they were holding. Every species fighting together, covering each other's weaknesses. A Hierarch's cruiser lost its shields protecting a human medical ship. Voidborn fighters sacrificed themselves to buy time for Seeker support vessels to retreat. A crystalline dreadnought rammed an Unmaking ship that was about to destroy a colony transport, both vessels exploding in a flash of light. They're retreating. Rachel shouted, watching the sensor feeds. The Unmaking fleet was pulling back, phasing out of normal space. We actually hurt them. The Allied fleet didn't celebrate. They regrouped, counted casualties, and prepared for the next attack. They'd won a battle, but everyone knew this was just the beginning. In the aftermath, Jake sat alone in his quarters, staring at the scar on his wrist where the Sovereign Shard's light used to glow. The crystal had gone silent, its purpose complete. It hadn't needed him to be a king. It needed him to be a bridge between species, between ancient past and desperate present. Michael Grant sent a message a week later. The Council wants to give you a formal title. Supreme Commander of Allied Defense Forces. They're building statues of you on 3 different worlds. Tell them no. Jake was already planning his next move. The defense network doesn't need a Supreme Commander. It needs coordinators from every species, all with equal authority. We won because we worked together, not because I told everyone what to do. So what will you do? Jake looked at the reports Rachel had compiled. Lists of refugees displaced by the fighting. Colonies struggling without supplies. People like he'd been, caught in circumstances beyond their control, just trying to survive. I'm using my council reward to start a foundation. Food. Shelter. Medical care. For anyone who needs it, regardless of species. Jake smiled slightly. The crystal called me a king, but I'd rather be something useful. The war with the Unmaking continued for months. More battles, more casualties, more hard-won victories. But the Allied fleet held. Species that had been enemies became brothers in arms. Technology from the predecessor vaults combined with innovations from current civilizations, creating defenses the ancient empire never imagined. Eventually, the Unmaking retreated back into dark space, driven off by a unified galaxy that refused to fall like the predecessors had. Jake stood on Zephyros station a year after he'd bled on the crystal, watching refugees move through the new shelters his foundation had built. The lower districts where he'd once stolen food now had distribution centers where anyone could eat for free. Medical clinics using predecessor technology treated patients regardless of ability to pay. Not bad for a beggar, Rachel said, joining him at the observation window. Still a beggar, Jake replied. Just one with better funding. The Sovereign Shard sat in a museum now, dark and dormant. It had found its lost king, forced him to unite a galaxy, then released him to be just a man again. Visitors came from across known space to see the crystal that had changed everything. But Jake never visited it. He didn't need to. The crystal had taught him what he needed to know, that humanity's real strength wasn't in ruling others or claiming power. It was in lifting people up, in choosing cooperation over conquest, in being the bridge that brings different worlds together. The beggar who bled on a crystal had become a king for just long enough to teach the galaxy it didn't need one. And that, Jake thought, was the best possible ending to a story that had started with stolen food and desperate flight through forbidden corridors. The lost king had risen, united a galaxy, and then chosen to disappear back into the crowd where he belonged.